online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
This is your Shock News Show with Noah Buckingham Reed. I'm joined by Benny Fiddimore. Your headlines at 7. British Storm Shadow missiles have been fired by Ukrainian troops into Russia for the first time. President Biden has allowed Kiev to do the same with US long-range missiles as the conflict passes 1,000 days. A 60-year-old man who worked as a scout leader and a babysitter has been convicted of dozens of sexual offences against children. Ian Sylvester preyed on victims as young as 7 over an almost 30-year period. Car company Ford announced plans to cut 800 jobs in the UK over the next 3 years. The company's blamed it on lower than expected demand for its electric cars. Almost 400 workers could be made redundant as Morrison's consider closing its own brand bakery. The supermarket says it started a consultation. And Shock Radio picked up 8 awards at the Student Radio Awards last night. Matt Hallsworth picked up the Gold Award for the Best Presenter, while Alfie Mulcahy received Silver for Best Newcomer. But on to the news show. I'm glad to have Benny with me here today. Very excited to have you on, and we've got plenty to talk about, don't we, this week? And I think the main story that we're going to be leading with is US President Joe Biden giving the green light for Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia. And I think those have gone in the last few days. We've even seen UK-produced missiles go into Russian land. So I just want to kick off with that and have that as sort of a leading topic. This has obviously made massive news over the last few days. Why do you think people think this is such an important development in the conflict, which we've seen going on for 3 years now?
I think it was unexpected. I have to say, I was surprised when I heard the news on Sunday night into Monday morning that Biden had authorized for these missiles to be launched at Russia. I was shocked. I think it's a symbolization from the US that they just want to get on with it now. I mean, it's been going on for 3 years. It's been causing a lot of death and destruction. So now is the time, in their mind, just to try and pressure Putin a bit more, especially as the Biden administration is coming to an end. Maybe they want that legacy that they actually did try to end the war. Because obviously with Trump saying he'll end it in one day, I think Biden is just trying to give his legacy a bit of credibility here.
You talk about saving his legacy. So you think it's more about that as he's outgoing? Do you think there's sort of maybe a fear? I mean, he's lame duck now. He's heading out of the presidency. Do you not think that he's perhaps more fearing for the future of Ukraine, or is this purely a legacy issue?
It's a good question. I think he probably wants to look like he's done something to help them, and I think by putting more pressure on Putin by allowing them to use missiles definitely does that, and maybe it does bring the war into a new I don't know era, because now Putin's under more pressure. There's going to be more damage done to Russia. I think he probably does care about Ukraine. He's been meeting with Zelensky, of course, for the last 3 years. And maybe I think he probably wants to help.
We talk about these meetings with Zelensky. Why has it taken so long for Biden to act in this way? I think Zelensky's been calling on him to act in more of this aggressive way, maybe towards Russia. It might be perceived by the Kremlin as aggressive. So do you think this is an aggressive stance? Why has it taken so long?
Again, maybe because now Biden's not got anything to lose as such. I mean, his presidency is coming to an end. It's a good question because I think, again, there will always be that rivalry perhaps between Biden and Trump. And obviously with Trump saying, yeah, we're going to end it in one day, Biden needs to try and find a way to compete against Trump. I think that's what it is. Legacy is important to a president. And he'll want to.
We saw that in his sort of hesitancy to give up his candidacy in the election.
Yeah.
And he left it so late that it might have actually been costly to the Harris campaign. So, I mean, it's a massive thing with presidents and legacy. But I don't think might not save his legacy. I mean, this is a last-minute movement. I think it's more of a rebuttal to the Russia bringing in North Korean troops. I'm not sure we've actually seen that, but it's been reported quite heavily that there's been North Korean troops, which Putin has managed to get along the border, not actually into Ukraine, but along the border. So I think it's quite tough to figure out where this idea comes from. And I think with the president doing it, the US considered leader of the free world, and now we're going to see maybe Britain follow along, France follow along. Maybe do you think it's a risk?
I think what he's doing here is he wants to leave the White House with the knowledge in his mind that he's left Ukraine in a stronger position to fight Russia than they are right now. And I think that's probably why he's done it at this stage and why he's waited this long, because I suppose that it's been a bit of a stalemate. We haven't really known what's going to happen in the future for the last few months. It's just been a case of fighting each other. But now, obviously, I think Biden is going. He probably fears what Trump's going to do, because obviously he keeps on making that claim, end the war in one day. So I suppose he just wants Ukraine to be in the strongest possible position to be able to win that war if it does end on day one, as Trump says. And I think that's why we're seeing this action being taken in the last few days of the presidency.
And I think the fear that many have had over this claim that Trump could end the war in one day is that this would mean there would be an agreement where American funding, $50 billion, would be pulled out of funding to Ukraine. It would take a huge funding push by the NATO countries to pull together that funding, which would be taken away by America. So I think the Trump idea is that he would be able to take away that funding, effectively communicate with both Zelensky and Putin, and end the war by potentially conceding land. Do you think that's a realistic proposition in Europe in 2024, that a sovereign country will concede land to a nation that has invaded the nation? Is it a good precedent to set, and will NATO make that argument to America, and will Trump pick up that argument?
Well, if America pull out, NATO pull out, I suppose, because I think
they have to.
I don't think they have a choice, do they?
Right.
Yeah.
No, because this is leave a massive funding black hole, which the NATO countries. It's not even necessarily about the funding, the actual infrastructure. America is one of the most heavily funded militaries in the world, and remove that infrastructure, that flow, that training to Ukrainians, and weapon force to the Ukrainian people. And I think Trump could be right that it could end very, very swiftly. Maybe not 24 hours, but it could end very swiftly. I think that's a dangerous precedent. We saw today that they launched UK-supplied missiles at Russian targets beyond the border for the first time. We haven't actually seen that Starmer is yet to formally follow suit of Biden and let Ukraine launch UK missiles. So do you think there's potentially that Starmer or NATO collectively could actually reprimand Zelensky for using these weapons? Because this escalates potentially Putin. We saw him remove the doctrine a few days ago of reducing what it could take for him to hit the nuclear red button. Do you think that potentially Starmer could actually use this as an excuse to step back from funding and follow in the suit of the incoming president?
Well, for now, I honestly think that he'll back Zelensky's decision to launch UK missiles, because the UK tends to follow what the US says. So whilst it's the Biden administration in power for the next 6 weeks or so, I reckon that Starmer will back the US. I think it will change when Trump comes in. I do think it's interesting to see what Starmer will say on the matter, and I think he's got to address Parliament about it definitely this week, and we can fully understand what the communications between the UK government and the Ukrainian government have been on this matter.
I'll just read this out. Ukrainian President Zelensky acknowledged the media reports in a video statement, but he did not confirm or deny whether the US gave approval, but said the missiles will speak for themselves. I think that will apply similarly to the UK. Keir Starmer then said that Vladimir Putin's irresponsible rhetoric on nuclear weapons, which we just discussed, him removing this doctrine, which makes it easier, is not going to deter his support for Ukraine. He told the G20 summit of world leaders in Rio de Janeiro, only one nation stands apart. So this is still the idea that NATO stands against Russia. How quickly, come January and we have Trump in presidency, how quickly could we see NATO sort of split on this idea? We've seen Germany sort of already become hesitant on the idea of Ukrainian funding. Do you think we could see a split in the new year of NATO?
In terms of governments, no. I think NATO will remain united throughout, and I think the Americans have so much influence on everyone else. In countries themselves, though, I think in the UK, we'll definitely have a very split view on it. I think we already do kind of have a split view on it in terms of Ukrainian funding. Like the Reform Party say we should stop funding Ukraine and their war efforts. I think that they will probably back it. I think Labour will have no choice but to back whatever the Americans do. But I imagine that there will be people in Parliament who will be very, very upset and divided on the matter. I mean, if we look at Boris Johnson, he's established a very good relationship with Zelensky, still has that. It goes out backing Ukraine in any TV appearance that he does. And I think there are a lot of people who are like him.
Does that sway Ukraine. The Conservative Party, maybe?
I think it's a big problem for the Conservative Party, for sure. Out of all the political parties in the UK, I think they could be the ones who who are most divided on this. But then again, Labour will probably have divisions as well. It will just be that their front bench have to do not what they necessarily believe is right, but what they have to do for national security, and that will be follow what the Americans do.
Okay, let's just listen to this clip from Starmer talking about the subject. I'm not sure we can hear that. Let's move on then. European governments have accused Russia of escalating hybrid attacks on Ukraine's Western allies. I think this point will just be of Starmer saying, get out of Ukraine, essentially. He wants the Russian war to end with a Ukrainian victory, not a Russian, sort of, not a deal which ends the war quicker. But European governments have accused Russia of escalating hybrid attacks on Ukraine's Western allies. It comes after fibre optic cables in the Baltic Sea were severed over the weekend. Russia has denied sabotaging infrastructure. So could we see more of this? We've seen Russia play dirty before. Is it potentially we could see that again?
Well, let's remember the poisonings in Salisbury a few years ago.
Right.
They have the potential to do that in the UK again. So it's definitely possible that they could retaliate in the Western allies and do stuff like that. And also, I think cyber attacks, they've been rumoured to have committed those before too. So they could definitely happen again. So yeah, of course they can definitely do something.
Okay, let's hear from Starmer now. Or let's not. I guess we'll be hearing this clip maybe later in the show. Let's go on now to Russia claiming US-supplied long-range missiles have been used by Russia on its territory for the first time. So we talked about this happening. Obviously, there is going to be a long-standing sort of position from Europe, and I don't think they've actually conceded that this has happened. So is there a risk that Russia can take this and run with it and use it against Europe maybe? Because this is obviously an issue which they'll find massively problematic for them. So it's understood that the British-made Storm Shadow missiles have been fired, but in response, Russia has reduced the threshold at which it can use nuclear weapons. So I think the point is here is that these weapons are going to be used. Now that we know that Western weapons are going to be used, is it potentially, should we fear for our security in Europe and beyond now? Because the battle lines have been drawn in a way, again.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to say that Ukraine, obviously, yes, we've seen these missiles directed at Russia this week, but it's not attack necessarily. It's more defense. They've sent these missiles to Russia in a bid to try and put them off attacking Ukraine. Ukraine haven't got an ulterior motive to invade Russia, so it's all about putting the pressure on them. Really, I think that Russia. We've seen tension boil before, so I would like to say we'll be fine, but obviously we don't know. We'll have to wait and see what the UK government say, and I think again we'll see what Trump says. I'm sure we'll have a response from him on this very soon, and let's just hope that things smoothen out over the next few days.
Let's go for a short answer when we wrap this up. Are we close to an end to the war in Ukraine, or are we further away? Compared maybe to the last few months compared to where we are now. Are we closer? Are we further away? Maybe pre-election in America?
Well, yeah, we are. We got it. We must be closer. We must be closer. Yeah, I think so. But again, I don't know. Yes and no.
It's an ever-adapting landscape. But let's go closer to home now. Let's talk about what is happening on our shores. And yesterday, we saw thousands head towards Parliament. Farmers from all across the country who gathered. 13,000 people demonstrated in central London against the new inheritance tax measures, something that was previously protected under Brexit. Before Brexit, under the EU, I should say. So, let's get opinions. Maybe not opinions, but it happened yesterday.
Yeah. So the big protest down Whitehall, we had thousands marching down, protesting against this new law or rule change that Labour are bringing in from April 2026. So from April...
Let's clear that up for our listeners quickly. So from April 2026, inherited agricultural assets worth more than £1 million, which were previously exempt, will be liable to inheritance tax at 20%. Just noting that on assets above £1 million, for non-agricultural assets is 40%. So they're already at a half discount. But it was, before that, they were previously completely exempt. So of course this has sparked much outrage. It's been the big headline in the media. So why do you think farmers feel like they're being so targeted by this budget?
Okay, so farmers, they are the backbone of the country. That's what they could claim. They make the food for the country and they feed the country. So you could argue that farms are an essential part of the UK in terms of their industry. So because they're essential, it's kind of like how food in supermarkets is exempt from VAT because it's an essential thing. That's why we've had this whole law to protect them from from inheritance tax. But there is the argument that they are also business owners. We've got many business owners across the UK in the hospitality industry, in the retail industry, and they're all dealt with financial burdens, particularly in the last few years with inflation and mortgage rates. So why is it? It's not fair that they're having to pay inheritance tax whilst the farmers aren't. Or you could look at it in the sense that because the farmers are very asset rich. If we look at land, it's very valuable, and we look at livestock, it's very valuable. Cash flow is actually very low, and the National Farmers Union have said that income is decreasing each year and matches nowhere near the amount of money that farms are valued at. So they're saying that whilst they may look like they're rich because their assets are worth a lot of money, farmers actually don't generate much income to the farms themselves because it's such a, I don't know,
Do you think it's a
not
sort
very
of
profitable industry?
Does it make Labour look out of touch?
Well, I think there are accusations of this because, I mean, there's a lot of disagreements between the Farmers Union and the Labour government. First of all, Keir Starmer's said that this will only affect the wealthiest of farmers, so 500 farmers he's claiming. The NFU go back and say 70,000 farmers will be affected. And they also say that 49% of farms are worth £1.5 million. So that means 49% at least of farmers will be paying this inheritance tax, which is completely different to the figures being given by the government.
These figures are massively contrasting, and I think based on whichever one ends up being the case, it was a massive argument for either side. But I think what we've seen is that it's been used as a massive wedge issue. We've seen the political extremes jump on this issue to sort of pound Labour in this. We saw Nigel Farage at the protest. We saw Kemi Badenoch at the protest, the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the Reform Party, among other Tory MPs, Tory shadow ministers. Why do you think that there seems to be some sort of cross-party agreement there, but Labour are not wavering at all on the point?
Yeah, they're not. They've so far they're saying they're not going to back down on it, and they say that the money that they'll generate from this tax will be essential because it will go towards schools, hospitals, etc., public services, and they say that the money is much needed there. I think the reason the other parties are coming together to fight it, because the Liberal Democrats have also said they've also jumped on.
The Green Party today have also, which is
really
quite interesting because
I suppose it makes
somebody
sense
on the other side of the political spectrum.
And actually, so we say that Reform and Conservatives are on it. They're both on the right of the political compass, and Greenpeace, who are more on the left as a political, I mean, they're not a party, obviously, but they're more of an activist group. They've come out against it too.
Right.
So it does seem to be that everybody is against for coming in from the left and the right, and then you've got Labour in the centre, and everybody's saying this is a bad idea. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the reason why
it's just another chance to pound Labour, though.
Well, yeah. So there's obviously that. All the parties are going to say we want to do whatever we can to damage the Labour Party's reputation. That's what it's like being an incumbent government. But at the same time, you've got people on the left saying that we need to support farmers to allow them to have the money to farm sustainably and effectively and ensure that they look after the environment. Whereas you've got those on the right, perhaps Farage, saying, well, we don't believe in tax, so we don't think these people deserve to be taxed. And then you've got the rich people like Jeremy Clarkson, who I think you'll come on to in a minute, saying that he disagrees with it, but that's maybe allegedly because he wants to avoid paying inheritance tax himself.
And I think what these extreme political extremes will argue that this is, I'll see it here. The National Farmers Union called the move disastrous. While we have presenter turned farmer Jeremy Clarkson says at the rally it will be the end of farming. Is there sort of scaremongering? I think Rachel Reeves called some of this sort of outrage around it scaremongering to farmers who don't know any better.
So I think it's hard to say it will be the end of farming, but I think for sure for some farmers it may be the difference between having a farm and not having a farm, because it is an additional cost to them at the end of the day. Whether the government would take a move which will completely destroy the farming industry, I think it's quite hard to justify that opinion, because it doesn't make sense to anybody. We need farming for food security, so I'm sure the government haven't gone out deliberately to try and destroy all farms. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if they make any changes before April 2026.
Right.
And I think we need to have a proper look at the figures, because we're getting different figures from the government and from the NFU. We need to have a clear and concise report into this, so we know exactly who's going to be affected and who's going to be impacted and to what scale before we make any more decisions.
And do you fear we could see a mini budget, another one? I mean, these aren't necessary budgets, but I think it would be a sign of Labour's issues if there was a call for a mini budget at some point down the line.
For now, no, I don't think so. No.
Okay, let's just talk quickly then about how I just wanted to raise this issue before we finish. 53% of farmers voted for Brexit. This was something that made their protection safe. So under EU law, primarily through common agricultural policy, which gave farmers subsidies and massive protections over their subsidies and tax rates. And now they've lost it because Brexit took us out of the EU. Do you think this could potentially pull voters back into the camp of pro-EU? In contrast to being pulled further to the political extreme of reform? I think it's an interesting topic, but I think it's not something that I think many people consider, that the majority, a small majority, but rural voters did swing Labour in this election. But in 2016, they did vote for Brexit, and that did remove their rights which they had under EU law.
Well, they voted for Labour, but they also voted Reform in these rural areas. There was so many places where they finished second. I honestly think that it would be hard to sway people back into that whole pro-EU camp, because it hasn't happened. I mean, we obviously
expected it to happen.
Yeah, exactly. We had the referendum, then we had all sorts of problems. I mean, there was the talk of Operation Stack in the Channel Tunnel, etc., between 2016 and 2019, and people still overwhelmingly voted for Boris Johnson in that election. So I think it's done, and I think a lot of people just want it to be done and in the past. I mean, it does bring up the debate, doesn't it? Whether this is all, how this will make people swing. But I think, like we've said before, it will make them swing one way or the other. They'll either swing towards the EU because they got the support from the EU before, or they'll swing towards the reform sort of side of things because they're promising to support them too. So, which way? I mean, half will go one way, half will go the other way.
Okay, well, quickly, just last thing. Shock Radio won big at the Student Radio Awards this week. They picked up 8 awards, 2 gold, 3 silver, 3 bronze. The golds went to Matt Halsworth for Best Presenter and Best Chart Show Programming. Shock Radio picked up bronze for Best Student Radio Station and Best Sport Programming. Shock will also host the SRA conference in April next year. You excited?
Yeah! This is going to be great fun.
Shock Radio.
This is a great thing for Salford as well, to have
Salford.
Everybody coming into our little town.
Love
City, I
Bring
should
'em.
say.
Bring 'em, I'm
Yeah,
ready.
definitely, and we'll have a great night. I'm sure we'll put on an excellent show. And it
Exactly.
has to be said, a great well done to everybody who works at Shock Radio,
Absolutely.
who's delivered these awards this year. I
Like
mean,
that one.
fantastic work,
Excellent work.
everybody. Well done.
Okay, thanks for joining me, Benny. A reminder of your headlines at 7:25. British Storm Shadow missiles have been fired by Ukrainian troops into Russia for the first time. President Biden has allowed Kiev to do the same with the US long-range missiles as the conflict passes 1,000 days. A 6-year-old man who works as a scout leader and a babysitter has been convicted of dozens of sexual offences against children. Ian Sylvester preyed on victims as young as 7 over an almost 30-year period. Car company Ford announced plans to cut 800 jobs in the UK over the next 3 years. The company blamed it on lower than expected demand for its electric cars. Almost 400 workers could be made redundant at Morrison's, considering closing down its own brand bakery. The supermarket says it started a consultation. And Shock Radio picked up 8 awards at the Student Radio Awards last night. Matt Halsworth picking up gold for Best Presenter, while Alfie Mulcahy received silver for Best Newcomer. Scattered showers of rain, sleet or snow continuing the evening, possibly resulting in icy stretches by dawn. A low of 0 degrees in Manchester. The Shock News Show was produced by Alfie Garner and directed for Shock TV by Aaron Walkden. Shock Radio News returns tomorrow.